like to say a very good morning indeed to Helen Dale. Helen, how are you?
Good morning, Mike. White rabbits.
Well, indeed. Thank you very much indeed. We wake into a new month, April Fool's Day. I was saying to Julie Hartley-Brewer, the way the news agenda's going, you can look at about 5 stories this morning and think that they're April Fool's stories, but actually they're real.
Well, yes, this is an ongoing thing. It was traditionally something you always saw on Twitter. You'd see a tweet that somebody had put out. Often, in my case, I would see it via a screenshot. And I'd sit there and go, they couldn't possibly have said that. That can't be true. It must be fake. And sometimes they were fake because there's these websites you can go to that generate joke tweets.
Yes.
But sometimes they were real. And I'm just sitting there going, well, takes all kinds. You know, the world is a jigsaw puzzle. Some of the pieces are pretty weird. Well,
I saw one yesterday by Clive Lewis, the Labour MP, which I was quite shocked at, where he's got a picture of a wizard of the Ku Klux Klan holding up his hand, wearing the full costume with the pointy hat, a fire going on, a cross on fire behind him. And he says, "Move along, nothing to see here, #race report." And you think to yourself, have you gone mad, mate? That is ridiculous. Also, it turns out this particular individual was gunned down a few years ago because of some row that he was having within the KKK. But, I mean, that's really not particularly helpful, is it?
It's part of the broader problem, which I've been repeating a number of times on your show in relation to various issues, and Black Lives Matter is only one of them. Elements of it have arisen with the Harry and Meghan situation. Elements have arisen now with response to this race report. It's American cultural and intellectual imperialism. Now, I realise the United States is an ally, but just because you are a military ally with another country doesn't mean you need to take on its culture and intellectual life. And Ed West, who I think is the editor of Unheard, he's certainly the deputy editor, he wrote a very good piece, and I saw people touching him up about it, because a lot of people think that if you criticise America, you're criticising NATO, forgetting that American culture and NATO are two very different things. And he just made the point in a very measured, systematic way about how all of this stuff from the United States about race is complete nonsense. It simply doesn't apply in the United Kingdom at all. And it helps no one of any race to even attempt to apply it to the United Kingdom. There's an argument to be made that it probably doesn't help people in America, but I'm not going to get on that particular bandwagon because I'm not American.
No,
and I mean,
some of the people yesterday who were conflating, the whole George Floyd situation with why this had to be a wrong report in this country, were just so far off the mark. It's not real. You've spent time in America. I lived there for 10 years. I know what America is like. I know what the problems are there racially, and it is a very racially divided nation. But Britain is not.
There is only one recommendation in that report, the point, and a very good one, the recommendation to divert young people with minor drugs offences, to divert them away from the criminal justice system and into health, welfare, rehabilitation. That's a very good recommendation. And that is one area, although once again, you always have to remember it's nowhere near as bad in the UK, where law enforcement does have a racial effect. The war on drugs has been known for a very long time to disproportionately in the United States lead to the incarceration of African American men. That's been well known. There was a period in the 1980s and 1990s when crime rates were very high, where African American men were more likely to finish up in jail for a felony than they were to go to university. That's a serious and a dreadful shame.
Yeah.
That's America. We've never been that bad, but it is undoubtedly true that low-level drug offences in this country, because of the geographical concentration of where African Caribbean people live, mainly in London, but also in other big cities, means you finish up with a disproportionately large number of young black men in strife with the police, very young, before they've had time to sort their lives out, and then they finish up with priors, and it makes it difficult. to get a job and to progress in your life.
Well, it
So
comes
that's
down
a
to what I
very
was
good
saying. But
recommendation.
it comes down to what I was saying yesterday, Helen. That it is what the report says more about class than it is about race, because it is about people who live in poor conditions, people who don't have access to good education, people who often live in broken homes, and I'm talking about white working class boys as well as black working class boys.
The report was very clear.
Yeah, and the white working
this
class.
is a general problem.
Oh, it is, and the white working class boys who live in areas which are, surrounded by drug dealers, which are run by drug dealers, are likely to get involved in the drug business just as much, and that's why they will find themselves not going to university in very big numbers and not going to higher education and not getting great jobs. So it's very much a class thing in this country.
In Britain it is, yes. It has always been that the locus of I don't think anyone realistically in a modern liberal democracy like the UK is oppressed. I think that's your classic case of rhetorical hyperbole that people are engaging in. But it is undoubtedly clear in this country, and if you're a Tory you have to admit it, and yes, the Tory party did have its head in the sand over this for many years, and it is getting better now on this issue. It is undoubtedly clear that in Britain, if you're going to be on your uppers and have less chances in life, it's likely to be on the basis of class, and that will be compounded by geography, hence the whole Northern and Midlands levelling up agenda, which is desperately needed.
Yeah. And that's the thing, but the trouble is now, Helen, that we are, as with everything it seems now in this day and age, we are using that kind of model of attributing everything to race to now, in the gender conversation, attributing all bad things to young men in schools. I mean, I know that we covered this earlier in the week, the school in Victoria, in that town, whose
Warrnambool.
Well, I'm not going to try and pronounce. I knew you'd be able to do it much better
than me. You say it. It's pronounced Warrnambool. It's a Aboriginal name.
Okay, but what happened there was quite remarkable. And people had said to me, "Why are we doing a story in Australia?" And I said, "Well, partly because it's so ridiculous. It doesn't matter where it happened. The fact that it happened at all is the story. And to make all of the boys apologise to all of the girls for something they hadn't done seems to me to be sort of peak wokery."
Well, it's actually worse than peak wokery. I mean, you can make a joke about it being peak wokery, and someone like Titania McGrath / Andrew Doyle would no doubt have a very funny joke to make, and I'm sure one or the other or both have made a funny joke. But what was done at Brauer College in Warrnambool in Victoria wasn't just wokery. It's an older phenomenon that we need to be on guard against, and we need to be very careful about, and that is collective guilt.
Yes.
Now, collective guilt has existed in civilizations for a very long time. It formed a large part of the wars of religion in Europe, and it forms a large part of the ongoing hostility between Sunni and Shia Muslims in the Islamic world. So this is a large social problem. And the reason it is a large social problem, collective guilt, is because it has its roots in what criminologists and psychiatrists call stereotype accuracy. And the piece for Law and Liberty that I wrote, that you've very kindly retweeted, and so people who listen to this or watch it on YouTube afterwards can have a look at Mike's retweet of my piece and just have a read of it, because there's lots of facts and data in there. Now, stereotype accuracy is unfortunately a thing. So I go into in the piece that male crime rates, violent crime rates especially, are higher than female crime rates, much higher, 9 times higher across the developed world, regardless of differences between countries. This seems to be a consistent characteristic. But it's not just men and violent crime and men and sexual assault and men and general bad behaviour in big cities like London. If you're going to allow women to play the collective guilt game with all men, then you've got a real problem, because you then start opening the door to people to play the collective guilt game with all Muslims and terrorism, and all African Caribbeans in London and drug crime. Now, statistically, Muslims are more likely to perpetrate terrorism. Statistically, African Caribbeans are more likely to engage in drug crime and county lines. But that does not tell you anything about any individual Muslim, male of any race, or African Caribbean that you might happen to meet on the street. Because as soon as you reduce statistical tendencies, stereotypes, down to the individual, basically mathematically, the likelihood of that individual being a criminal of whatever sort is very, very tiny. Now, to put what happened in Warrnambool in context, imagine if a school in Rotherham, where there were all those dreadful grooming gangs and they all came from one ethnicity and one religion, told all the Pakistani Muslim boys in the school to stand up and apologise to all the other kids of both sexes and all ethnicities that they were sorry for the grooming gangs in Rotherham. Think about this.
Yeah. Well,
Think about what it means and how nonsense it is.
Well,
it's
of course
dreadful.
it is. Well, of course it is. But that then would never have happened anyway, though, because this is not something that you would put into what they would regard as, you know, a difficult situation. But they can do it with all boys in this school in Victoria because they don't have that sensitivity, do they?
No, the point is, this is a rule of law point, and I've often banged on about the rule of law and the underlying principles of the rule of law, which do actually also apply in policing and in general public conversations, is you must be consistent about these things. If you open the door to stereotype accuracy, which is real, it's not hard. If you read my piece, all the links to the ONS data and Pew Research and the National Institutes of Health in the US are all there. They're all accurate. They're easy to find. You know, this is not something that anyone who is statistically literate would have any difficulty in tracking down. If you open the door to stereotype accuracy in one area and let it drive policy, then you have to do it for all the others. This is the problem.
Yes.
And particularly when you're dealing with very large groups, like men are nearly, they're just under half of the population. It's a very large number. This is very dangerous and you don't want to go there. Collective guilt is extraordinarily dangerous.
Yeah.
But by the same token, you have to have an adult conversation about things like disproportionate crime rates and like the fact that some low-level sex offences like flashing have a historic link towards becoming a more serious offender in the future. That's been documented. But other low-level sexual harassment or behaviour that falls short of the criminal threshold, as criminologists call it, persistent low-level offending, like wolf whistling and catcalling and being an idiot on staring at people on the tube and that kind of thing, that falls short of the criminal behaviour. The criminal threshold. Women are intimidated by it. We have now heard, since the Sarah Everard case imposed itself on the public consciousness, we've all heard of this now. We all know that this is an issue. But you then have to, if you're going to engage in that stereotype accuracy, you then have to acknowledge that that kind of behaviour, the wolf whistling, is not correlated with an escalation in criminality. And in fact, it's a biological problem. It has biological roots, and it's actually very common at schools. And it's what teenage boys do, largely to intimidate other teenage boys. But it has an effect of intimidating women as well.
Well, it does. But I mean, as I say, I watch my sons going to school and have done for many years, and some of the activities and the behaviours of what is going on are quite fascinating to watch. But what makes me feel slightly uneasy is this Ofsted approach now, which is to basically go into schools and to see whether they have some kind of sexual abuse problem, which I don't believe there is in any massive numbers.
I'm not sure the issue is actually sexual assault or sexual abuse in schools. I would be very interested to see what any sort of inquiry brings out of this. Like the race relations inquiry is, I haven't read it all yet. It's so long. It's 258 pages long. It's incredibly detailed. There's a lot of good analysis in there, lots of great information. The people who've put it together have done a huge, and to do it so quickly, you know, and great statistical information, and they've put all the links in so you can dive right down into their data. It's very good. It's going to take a while for people to digest that and to get on top of the data.
Well, the business of race is going to be banging on about this for quite some time, because they are going to try and discredit it. They're going to make out that, and they've already started doing it, that they're not even following their own data, because some of the conclusions they've drawn are not borne out by the data, which is not actually true. But the race industry is hopeful that nobody's going to bother reading it because it's too long.
Well, and the problem you've got there, is the classic one, and I use this line in my Law and Liberty piece. Facts may not care about your feelings, but feelings have better lobbyists. And at the moment, feelings have better lobbyists on race. Now, what you don't want is feelings to have better lobbyists on sex and gender, because you're not then just dealing with maybe 10% of the population, the ethnic minority percentage of the population. You're dealing with the entire country.
Yeah.
You know, you're dealing with every single person who walks into a polling station in May and casts a ballot, and all the people who don't bother because you don't have compulsory voting in this country. Yeah, so this is very serious, and it needs to, serious effort needs to be put into getting it right, because I guarantee you, if you do an honest report that's carefully and analytically done, like the race relations report that Tony Sewell's just put out for number 10, you will find the same complex and nuanced difficulties. You know, you will find the same issues that are, you look at them and you suddenly discover that they're very hard to fix. And that some of the things you thought about the world and about the way the world works, you're drawing inferences from information where the information may be accurate, in this case that males are more criminal than females, are more likely to be violent, and are much more likely to perpetrate sex offences. So that's accurate information. But to impose collective guilt on the entire male population when we know, for example, that there are relatively few rapists in the population, but that they are terrible recidivists, is really, really to get to. It's like looking down the wrong end of a telescope and wondering why you can't see anything.
Yes, but also this tells me a lot as well about the way that we have become so absolutely and utterly addicted to data. You know, that we are told by the government now that we follow the data, not the dates. You know, everybody talks about polling. Everybody talks about what the public believes. Everybody talks about the collection of information. But what they don't talk about is how they misinterpret that. And that's a great example, isn't it? Because, yes, I'm sure, I'm sure it's true that men are more likely to commit crimes. And I'm sure it's true that men are more likely to commit sexual crimes. However, that's only some men. It's not all men.
Yes.
Therefore, the collective thing that they have in common is not their gender. It's the fact that they're bad people.
Well, this is the thing. And we don't want to deal with the reality of criminal behaviour and criminality. And to refer you back again to Professor Steve Davies's work, drawing on the big longitudinal study, the Dunedin study in New Zealand.
Yeah.
There are people out there who are persistent early onset offenders, and you can detect some of these behaviours even when they're children. And most kids who are like this, and the majority are boys, but there are some girls as well, they just age out of it. They just age out of the behaviour when they're quite small. But there is a persistent early onset offender group. They often get diagnosed with this conduct disorder, but a lot of lawyers don't actually think that that's a real thing. They think it's just a case of, as a society, we're not managing people who do have criminal inclinations at a young age in a particularly effective way. But the thing that the Dunedin study shows is it's very challenging if you are a liberal, and I think I mentioned this on one of your other previous independent republics in the past, if you are a liberal, to be confronted with the reality that there are people in the population who just, they like committing crime. They're persistent criminals, they're recidivists. It's very, very challenging because nobody wants to get up in public and say that some people have criminal tendencies, because it starts sounding like, and it may actually be because research is being done in this area by the people in the Dunedin study in New Zealand at the University of Otago, is that it may be partly heritable.
Yes, it may well be.
Yes, which is really quite very confronting if you're a liberal. Now, I'm a classical liberal. That's the conservative side. We're on the right side of politics, but I am still fundamentally a liberal. You know, I am coming out of a liberal tradition in the same way that someone like Ed Davey and his opposition to vaccine passports, or Keir Starmer and his comments are about policing at the Sarah Everard vigil. These are all comments that liberals will make. We are, all three of us, despite our different politics, are fundamentally in a liberal tradition.
Yes.
So this is very confronting.
I mean, again, a good example, and we haven't really got much time left here, but I heard a remarkable thing yesterday. Kit Malthouse unveiled this new plan to tag up people to make sure they weren't drinking. These were people who committed crimes while under the influence of alcohol by measuring the sweat that they produced literally after having a snifter of brandy, not even a full, shot of it. And they said, but of course, we have to be very careful about how we roll it out. We're not going to make it apply to alcoholics. And you go, well, hang on a minute. So if you're an alcoholic, because you're deemed to be somebody who has a medical problem, you are not going to be monitored for in the way that you may be committing crime under the influence of alcohol. It makes literally no sense.
It makes no sense at all, because people don't want, it's this liberal refusal to engage with stereotype accuracy, and the fact that there are people with tendencies to particular sets of bad behaviour. I mean, it's like the principle, you can buy these in Australia. I don't know whether you can buy them here, but there's a little thing you can get that you can put on your car,
yes.
The breathalyzer, an engine immobiliser, that basically if you get behind the wheel of your car and you're over 0.08, or in Australia it's 0.05, your car won't start.
Yes.
Basically, so you're left to sit there until your blood alcohol content has dropped.
No bad
and the
thing.
thing is, no bad thing. That's very sensible. And if it forces you to sit in the motor vehicle or go back inside and wait till wait
maybe
till
just
you're sobered
call a
up,
cab.
or call a taxi, then, well, yes. I mean, I'm sure
Exactly.
that the proprietors of Uber and black cabs will love you, but...
Exactly right. Absolutely. Listen, we've got to run. Sorry to end it abruptly, but Helen, thank you very much indeed. Some fascinating stuff there from Helen Dale, as ever, talking our way through all the various different anomalies, strange and unusual kind of rules, and the data problem, I think, in this country. I think we've hit a nail on the head there, because people are collecting all this data, but they don't know what to do with it. I think they're quite often getting it wrong when they basically analyse it and use it to make policy, aren't they?